Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us on this latest episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the Head of Marketing at InvoTools. Today, we're joined by Laura Beavin-Yates, who serves as the Senior Vice President of Customer Success for Immersion, a neuroscience SaaS company. Laura earned her PhD in cognitive psychology from Claremont Graduate University and contributed to the foundational science of Immersion. Prior to her current role, Laura served as the manager of R&D for the Ipsos Neuro and Behavioral Science Center, applying innovative methodologies like implicit reaction time, facial coding, eye tracking, and biometrics to address complex brand challenges. She also served as Senior Research Manager at Coherency Marketing, leading and executing quantitative and qualitative studies designed to identify emotional underpinnings of brand affinity. So thanks for joining us on the show, Laura.
Thanks so much for having me, Michael. And that overview makes it sound like I've been around for decades.
Nice.
I love it.
A life member, no doubt.
Maybe a little.
Yeah. So what's the most significant thing you're going to share with us today?
Well, I'm really excited, Michael, to share that, I'm excited to talk today about how Agile neuroscience techniques can really help companies start to make better decisions on what their audience's brains truly value.
Okay, cool. Let's unpack that then. Give us a bit of a context for today's discussion. What is Agile neuroscience research?
That's a great question. Ultimately for us, Agile neuroscience means something that Agile has become a really important phrase that we're using, of course, now, I think in today's state where we have COVID and we all are working remotely, not all of us, but many of us still remote or hybrid. And so for us, Agile really means the ability to meet people where they are. Agile means being able to fit into various scenarios that neuroscience couldn't formerly do. So traditionally, neuroscience has been complex and oftentimes requires a lab. And so what we've really worked to do is to make it something that doesn't require so many criteria to actually execute and utilize and to get insights from. We want to provide a neuroscience solution that is adaptable, easy to use, and can be deployed pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, nice, because you have this mindset of neuroscience, all these things being attached to your brain.
Yeah, I know. And that's the wild thing, when you think about neuroscience traditionally, it's rolling into a tube that is a claustrophobic thing that's going to actually read what your mind is saying. And that's just simply not how neuroscience works anymore. Sure, there are those traditional methodologies, but it's come a long way, which is really exciting.
Yeah, cool. So some listeners out there may be thinking what you've just discussed sounds like a standard neuromarketing tool or approach. Would they be right? Is the approach you take different? If so, how?
Yeah, so it's interesting. Thank you for that incredible intro. But as you mentioned in the intro, I actually started, my time working with neuroscience in general started when I was in graduate school, but I actually worked in neuromarketing or consumer neuroscience not long coming out of graduate school. And a lot of the methodologies, and this was about 10 years ago that I started, a lot of the methodologies in that time actually were still, some of them were agile, some of them were things that could be scalable, but a lot of those really required a lot of control or needing to be in a lab. Traditionally, neuroscience methodologies are things that usually you need to establish a lot of control around, because if you're putting a 256 electrode on someone's head, that requires you be in lab. It's just not something you can do out in the world. Even methodologies that are more scalable that have been developed in the past, or become more popular in the past 10 years or so, like facial coding, like biometrics that are a little bit more scalable, like eye tracking, all of these things are moving toward more scalability and a little bit more agility. But what we're really working to do with our Agile neuroscience solution is to always meet people where they are and to make things simpler. So we actually tap into smartwatches that people already wear. So it's an easy experience where they're not taken out of the moment. They actually we can measure what their reactions are in real time as they're naturally having an experience, as they're shopping, as they're watching content on their couch. So, the big difference from our perspective is that we're really working to make this something that meets people where they are, that's easy to deploy, but also we've built something that's actually more of a self-service platform for people. So it doesn't take, a month to get your results. It doesn't cost $50,000 to do so. What we're really trying to do is democratize our Agile Neuro solution so that anyone actually has access to it and anyone can do neuroscience to really understand the consumers that they're measuring.
Yeah, sure. Sounds pretty interesting. How do you challenge, sorry, go slightly off piece here. How do you navigate around consumer privacy with something like this and the data, et cetera, that you're collecting?
That's a great question, and obviously something that when you start to think about smartwatches, we also, can tap into fitness devices. That's something that's hugely important to us. So ultimately, when we are helping companies and brands utilize our solution, ultimately everyone who is participating in an immersion measurement or who is basically having their kind of real-time reactions measured, they're opting in, first of all. So we're never measuring anyone who doesn't know it. This is a completely opt-in scenario. Consumers download an app onto their phone, they pair their smartwatch, they start data collection. It's not something where we're, pulling the rug out from under them. That's number one, is giving those consumers the control. The other element for us is that we're actually completely anonymizing data when it comes to our platform. And so we protect anyone's data with an anonymous code so that you don't see any personal information about them. The last element is that while we're tapping into smartwatch and fitness sensors, we are collecting second by second changes in cardiac rhythm, but that data actually goes up to the cloud. We have algorithms that automatically convert that data into our measures on our platform so that the end user is actually seeing data in aggregate that has been converted to a scale that's never traceable back to the individual person. Now, we have ways you can map demographics, but that's still all protecting privacy entirely. For us, that privacy is number one, because nobody wants to, in this day and age, we know you need to know when you're being monitored.
Yeah, no, for sure. So what you've said just there sounds really fascinating and exciting, and like technology often for people will feel like a bit of a shiny object that always attracts attention, but traditional methodologies will always have their place. So the challenge, I guess, for insights teams is how to bridge that gap between the old and the new. So tell us, how does Agile Neuroscience provide that added value when used in conjunction with traditional methodologies?
That's a really, really great question as well, Michael, and something that we hear on a regular basis, right? Because I have worked in traditional market research. I've used qualitative methodology and quantitative, and those alone, of course, have a ton of different methodologies under their umbrellas. Those things are never going to go away. Those approaches provide a ton of value. But those approaches also are challenged to get beneath the surface. So those, when you're asking someone how they feel about something, as a human, my feelings are all tied up in the current moment. It's very hard for me to disentangle how I'm feeling now versus how I was feeling 20 minutes ago when I was actually in the moment looking at a brand concept, for example. So ultimately, traditional methodologies tell us a lot, but they only give us what humans are consciously aware of. The complement from a neuromarketing methodology or agile neuroscience is to be able to understand what is unsaid, to be able to understand second by second what these unconscious reactions are. And ultimately, we have context for what's happening when those reactions are occurring. What is a person doing? What experience are they having? What content are they looking at? What product are they interacting with? But we ultimately need additional context from traditional methodologies to really put color to the why. Why did we see that you completely disconnected from this experience at second 3 and you never came back? That's something where when you dig in with a qualitative approach or you use additional information you can get from a larger scale survey, you can start to really understand the nuances of why people disconnected with an experience or, basically aren't captivated, aren't moved by it, aren't likely to actually go out and purchase your product.
Yeah, cool. I've always been fascinated by the relationship between academic and commercial worlds. In fact, I'm planning an episode on the very subject as well. I understand, as you've mentioned as well, Immersion has roots in academia. So do you care to tell us a little bit about Immersion's origins and its journey to its current Agile neurostate?
Yeah, I would love to, because you know what, Michael, this has actually been part of my fabric for quite some time now. I actually got my PhD working in the graduate lab where our technology emerged from. So we actually, our company emerged from an academic lab in Claremont, California called the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies. It is based at Claremont Graduate University. And of course, this whole concept was non-existent when we started, when we were doing our core research. We were not even thinking about having a company that would provide an agile neuro solution. Where we started actually as an academic lab was trying to understand whether or not we could identify physiologic markers of decision-making. So I always joke about my graduate degree involving blood, sweat, and tears, and that's because it literally did. So when we started as a lab, when I joined the Center for Neuroeconomic Studies, we were actually measuring physiologic evidence of these decision-making by doing blood draws. So people would come into the lab, we would stick them with a needle to get a baseline read of their hormone levels, and then we would show them a video that was actually a father talking about his son who had terminal brain cancer. That's where the tears came in. Very, very emotional video. And then we would actually do a second blood draw, and we would look to see whether or not there was any physiologic evidence, hormone change, that would tell us whether or not, number one, people said that they felt empathic and emotional and connected to the video. But more importantly, could we use hormone release to predict whether or not individuals were likely to donate some of their very hard-earned money after getting stuck twice with a needle, right? Would they be willing to donate some of that money to the organization who created the video? And what we actually found is that the individuals who released this hormone, oxytocin, actually were more likely to donate their hard-earned money, and more of it, the more oxytocin they released. This was a big deal because at the moment, nobody had really done any research to show that there are physiologic markers that tell us that when you're interacting with something, it's actually moving you to a point that you're likely to do something later. And so we got a little press around this. We got a call from the US government who said, hey, you guys found something really interesting. We want to be able to do this at scale. We want to understand if we were to drop a flyer in a battlefield. I mean, this is super relevant now, right? In the situation we're in, if we want to be able to change behavior and actually know we're communicating to people in a way that is meaningful and that's going to move them, how can we do that without sticking people with needles? Yeah. So they put us to the test basically to figure out a way that we could identify this significant moment was happening, that oxytocin was releasing, but to do it at scale. And it was us and a number of other labs who were challenged with this. And they said, hey, again, the two kind of key criteria, you have to be scalable. It can't involve doing blood draws. And number two, you have to actually be validated by third-party labs. And so, Michael, we went to work and, we spent about 7 years actually doing research on every technology but the kitchen sink. I mean, the kitchen sink wouldn't be very predictive, I'll tell you, of hormone release. But ultimately, we tested 256 electrode EEGs dipped in saline solution. We looked at lasers. We analyzed breath to see if we could detect oxytocin in the breath. Yeah. When I talked about blood, sweat, and tears, we were measuring skin conductance, cardiac rhythm change. And what we found from all the testing that we did is that the number one predictor actually of this release of oxytocin, the number one thing, the correlate that can tell us this happened, is actually small changes in your cardiac rhythm. It's not about how fast your heart is beating. We can game the system there. If I run in place, it beats faster. It's really about the nuanced ways in which it speeds up, slows down, speeds up, slows down. And what we found that by looking at cardiac rhythm change alone, we could predict release of oxytocin and also subsequently their behavior. Yeah, okay. And so that's really where we started. And it's actually not surprising because we have the largest concentration of oxytocin receptors in our vagus nerve, which innervates the heart. So it makes sense that when you're releasing this from the brain, binds to the vagus nerve and then controls the way in which your heart is beating, right? So that's really kind of how we got to where we are now. We found that we could do this using fitness sensors that we're measuring second by second. And then we realized, oh my goodness, there isn't really a scalable, easy solution to understand real-time reactions from the brain. What if we take this and make it into something that we can actually help people who couldn't afford traditional neuroscience methodologies. Let's help them by creating this kind of scalable, easy DIY solution. So
Yeah,
that was kind of a long overview, but it's been a journey.
Nice. So assuming that Tim Cook was listening here, have you got any requests for the next iWatch that's coming out?
I don't know about that one. Yeah, that's a hard one.
Oh, cool. Being a practical person, I love hearing about real world examples and successes that people have had with entrepreneurial endeavors. So what are some of the applications in which you've seen Agile Neuro applied?
I love that question because, one of the challenges that I had previously, again, is in working in neuromarketing was that we would have people who would come to us and say, I want to try something innovative. I want to do something new. I'm open to using a neuroscience methodology. But half the time the challenge was what they wanted to do really had to be, again, executed in a lab. I remember working, evaluating basically mails, so mailers. That's something that is really difficult to do in the home when you have no control, or at least it was at the time. So what's really exciting to me is that I get the benefit of actually working with people using our tech for a ton of different applications. I mean, we have been deployed in product testing in home. I had testing, which is like they send the product in home, I'm interacting with it. That's been really hard to do with neuromarketing tools because, again, to meet people in their home is difficult. Yeah. We work on, concept testing, early stage concepts, and that could be branding concepts, product concepts, or just generally, an ad concept, for example. We do content testing. We do shop-alongs, measuring people along their journey. Early on, before we were even connecting into smartwatches and we were only using fitness sensors, we did a kind of journey through an airport and checking into, this day and age, we need that, right? The travel experience isn't what it used to be. We've also seen companies, so even outside of the market research space, we have companies who are utilizing us to understand their employee experience, to measure whether or not training and education sessions are actually connecting with individuals, whether or not they're actually absorbing that information. So I think, Michael, one of the most exciting things for me in working with Immersion, and I've been officially back kind of with my grad school team at all for 3.5 years. And it excites me because we'll have people come to us and say, would this work in this scenario? And the answer is almost always yes, because again, we don't have to be in a lab. And so It's been super exciting for me. And at the end of the day, I always tell people the challenges for designing good research still exist for traditional methodologies or, neuromarketing methodologies. And so I get the benefit and pleasure of getting to meet with people on insights teams and to talk to them about their challenging questions and to work with them to design a study where they can complement their methodologies they're already using with our solution. And it's been exciting to get to see those unique applications in places where people couldn't usually use neuromarketing.
Yeah, I'd really love to see studies or examples of neuroscience being used in mental health and the impact of what we eat on that. So different foods and drinks, etc. How that plays with our well-being, etc.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because our primary metric is immersion, which is really about identifying the extent to which people are attending to something, but more importantly, are they emotionally connecting in a way that's meaningful and in a way that's going to have a long lasting impact that ultimately where if I'm shopping, at Target and I see a product on a shelf, am I driven toward that? The other measure actually that we have though is something called psychological safety. And that is huge in the mental wellness space. And so we're seeing a lot of applications again, kind of in organizations when it comes to looking at psychological safety over time. And you're right when it comes to like what we're eating, how much we're sleeping, all these factors, they play a huge role on our physiology and the ability of our brain to actually be all in and be absorbent and to connect with the product and to, so anyway, it's been exciting. And I agree with you. I think that's a space where we'll continue to see a lot more neuroscience tools applied is in that mental well-being and health space.
Yeah, cool. So a follow on just from that prior question, what are some of the significant insights that you've helped clients uncover using your approaches?
So it's been, there's such a long list, but I'll try to obviously keep it targeted. Because again, we get to work in so many different spaces. One of the kind of most exciting projects that I'm really passionate about right now, especially given where we're at given where we're at in general in humanity, is we've actually been partnering with a company called eSource, which is dedicated to basically insights around changing behavior, sustainability, decarbonization, moving toward electric and away from, these kind of harmful things. And so with eSource, we actually did a project where we were looking at how to message and speak to and connect with people at different points in the electric vehicle buying process. And so it was really interesting because the challenge was these utilities companies and auto manufacturers have huge goals that have been set by the government, right? To do a better job of changing attitudes and getting people to be open to these technologies. And so when we partnered with eSource, we actually looked at a number of different types of video-based messaging around electric vehicles, about sustainable behavior. And we were actually able to identify that there are very kind of different ways, different kinds of messages and content that people along different points of their potential buying journey for an electric vehicle are really connecting with. And so to me, I love that because it starts to help utilities and auto manufacturers understand, how do we talk to people in a way that's actually meaningful, that isn't going to get washed away with the noise? Because so right now we're so bombarded with so many things that to change behavior, to actually get people to be open to considering these kinds of new mobility approaches, we need to be able to connect with them deeply. And so that was really exciting for me.
Yeah, cool.
Another example, I don't know, again, if you want a couple of them, is we've actually had we've worked a lot actually with another company, which I know you had Rebecca Brooks on not long ago. So we've been working a lot with them at Alter Agents, and I love the team over there to actually surface some really interesting understanding of how people are engaging with different types of social media platforms, and really understanding how are different and new kind of tech-based approaches connecting for, advertising for social media, for et cetera, how are those connecting with different kinds of consumers? And are they really doing the right job to transport people and to basically enable them to feel as though they're actually in the environment, trying out different products, considering different things. And so it's been really interesting working with them to identify what types of platforms are really doing a great job of connecting with people, and how some of these new tech-based approaches are helping to change the world for consumers and for brands, right? Because you're actually you're being invited more closely, I feel like, into consumers' homes and next to them, right? As opposed to kind of speaking to them. So
that's right. And she was also, Rebecca was also talking about one particular project. There was quite a big downturn in sales and activity, etc. And they had no idea when they just looked across the market, nothing much had changed, but there was a whole lot of activity on a private channel platform that they just weren't aware of. And until they started just reshifting their marketing efforts to sort of do something similar or play in that same kind of space, they were able to make up ground. But what you can't see often requires that additional, a different approach to your marketing or business.
Yeah, and that's been one of the really, again, exciting things is, because I worked in traditional methodologies, I would never say you need to that would be, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like that is hugely important, but it can only go so far. And so if you really, again, if you ever anticipate that there's something that, and I've talked to tons of people in Insights who also say, I know that the consumers are telling me this, but it doesn't feel like they're being entirely honest, or not quite sure that what they told me in this qualitative session or this focus group or this one-on-one, I don't know if they're giving me the whole story. By having a compliment where you can see, hey, what does their physiology look like at this time? It can really help you to kind of guide the way that you're asking them questions. One of my other kind of favorite things is, looking at, when it comes to like shopper research, when you're in the moment, you're shopping, you're not analyzing the experience that you're having. And then if you have somebody who's coming along with you, that can be a challenge sometimes to really feel as though it's a completely natural experience. And so we've worked with a couple of different companies in doing their shopper research to understand kind of points of friction in the both shopping journey, but also checking out and understanding things that they may not miss that they may miss simply because people aren't recording it on a survey because it doesn't come top of mind after they leave the store, right?
Have you seen Agile Neuroscience changing the way that traditional research methodologies has been carried out?
That's a good question. It's interesting because I think, again, I've seen, I guess, we've had so many changes over the past couple of years, right, in the way that research is done with not being able to do things in person. So it's a little bit hard to tell what has happened because of the changing world and what has happened because of more agile solutions. I think that in general, we're seeing that all kinds of research is being required to become more agile. It's more necessary to do things on Zoom or virtually, or to think about allowing people to do their own shop and not having somebody kind of right there next to them. So I don't know necessarily that agile neuro solutions are force changing or leading to change in those spaces. But I think that what is changing is that people are realizing there's more opportunity to add something like this into their traditional methodologies, and that formerly, when they wanted to do things that were virtual, they couldn't use neuroscience because it required being there in person, that now they're seeing, wait, we're doing so much virtual work and we're doing so many different agile solutions anyway. This is something that helps us get ahead of the curve and actually it helps differentiate us because we have solutions that you're not seeing everywhere, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, and it's motivating, I guess, as well for insights teams who've now got all this additional firepower at their fingertips to go off and find these new hidden insights that were previously like just hidden in those clearer white spaces. So
hidden or inaccessible. I mean, again, what really kills me is having these conversations where, because if you can't tell, I'm a people person. I love to talk to people. I love to pick their brain. It makes me really, really happy. And, so I'm always trying to kind of learn from insights folks, like, what are you using? What methodologies are common for you? Have you ever tried neuroscience? I'm just curious, like, what's your experience been? And it always pains me to hear people say, like, yeah, I think it's really cool. Because when I worked at Ipsos, I was like on a small team, and I would talk to all the people in the, like others on other client teams, and everyone was always so excited about the concept of using neuroscience and neuromarketing solutions. But when I talk to people outside of that space, it was, well, yeah, it sounds really cool, but I can't pay $50,000 for one answer, And so it's been really exciting to see that change and to hear from people saying, like, wait, you have something that we can get the same answer for half the cost or more than half the cost. Like, that's exciting for me. So
very cool. So time to dust off the old crystal ball. Where do you see the future of neuromarketing heading?
That's a really great question. So I think that we'll continue to see things be more agile. And, again, we can meet people where they are by tapping into a smartwatch, but that doesn't mean that we're not auto-activating anything. I anticipate as things continue, people will opt in to scenarios where if I come into a store like Target, I don't need to auto-activate it. I'm interested, right? I think we'll see more technology communicating, and as the Internet of Things grows, and as we'll have more communication between that. And so I think it will become even more real time, where you'll see that. For example, I'm at Disney and I'm in line, for a ride, and all of a sudden I get pinged and I have a character come up to me to make my experience better because I was not having, my physiology showed I wasn't having a great experience. I mean, ultimately that is where neuromarketing will be. It's not just being used. I think it will move to a space where it's not just used to answer a few questions. I think it's going to ultimately be used to help curate and to personalize things. I think also, as we're seeing like things grow in the space of augmented reality and the metaverse and people purchasing things in the metaverse, we're going to see more again, kind of crosstalk from tech, where it's going to be important to have this kind of real-time data in order to understand how to really curate and make that experience personal. I heard a really cool talk the other day. It was Innovate, or not, I'm sorry, it wasn't Innovate. I'm going to pause that and maybe clip that out. I heard a really great presentation the other day by Taluna, and they were talking about, they did some research around the metaverse, and it was talking about how people that they surveyed really want a personalized experience. So I think that consumers are going to keep demanding that personalization. And as that continues to happen, we'll see more agile neuroscience kind of come in and be, again, less of a one-off, or less of a, I'm just trying to get answers here, and more of a, how can this experience really be curated to me in real time, right? And how do we kind of adjust and update in real time? And I'm excited about that, because again, I want things to be relevant to me as well. When I'm advertised to, when I'm having an experience in the world, there are too many things that are trying to grab my attention. I'd much rather have something meaningful that matters to me ultimately.
Yep. So two of my favorite books, one's just been made into a movie, is a series or a sequel, prequel, Ready Player One by Ernest Cline.
Yeah, it's so good.
I don't know if you've read the books, but he's done so well. I grew up in the 90s as well, so like attached to a lot of that stuff there, and the world that he's painted in that metaverse, having that haptic feedback, etc., with the suits that they're wearing, all of this sort of playing in that kind of zone. It's quite exciting to see.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting, Michael? We're actually partnering with a company that is developing their name is Immersion, and they're actually developing a haptic scenario where you can interact. So the entire kind of concept came from the gentleman, the founder, who said, I live very far from my family. I don't get an opportunity to see them often, and I miss that. And I want to have a deeper connection with them. And so they're actually utilizing Immersion to understand that kind of product experience as they're working on developing this product. But it's really awesome. I got the benefit of going over to their offices, which are over here in Venice, and they have the system they put together actually uses air to make you feel the sense of haptics, and as though you're actually interacting with a person. So it is really exciting. I definitely don't see us moving into a space where we're gonna, I hope we don't move into a space where we're living in that virtual world all the time. But I think as we start to see, again, the augmentation and like being able to marry things where everything is customizable, both in the metaverse and outside of it, I think it's going to be exciting to see how things unfold. And I think, I anticipate like at a point I'll be able to sit on my couch and hopefully have programming suggested to me based on how I'm feeling, right? As opposed to, spending hours and hoping the algorithms get it right.
Yeah, true. Just switching between Netflix and Amazon and Disney.
Hulu and HBO. I know, it's like, you spend, and they say, there's research out there that shows this, right? It says that like I think you'd spend like 20 minutes or something on average, like looking for something to watch. At the end of the day, it always kind of cracks me up. And I certainly by no means think anyone should or everyone should share their data. But at the end of the day, we all have one of these cell phones we're holding in our hand, most of us at least. A lot of us have this tech that's kind of listening to us and that can, smart tech at home. I won't say the name because I don't want to activate it, but ultimately those things, we want those because they make our experiences more personal, right? And we can actually customize our own experience. And so I'm excited about the time, and I will happily opt in to having my television listen to me or whatever it is, or tap in my smartwatch, because I want to have something that makes me happy and that can actually help contribute to a better life for me, so, and for other people, that's what I actually care more about. But it'll be interesting to see how things unfold. I think it'll be here before we know.
So part of my crystal ball is wondering if the whole subscription model will actually flip on its head, where companies are actually subscribing to me for my personal data.
I love that idea.
That would be pretty cool.
It would be cool. It's really interesting because I've certainly had conversations kind of about that space, like in that space where it's like people opting into offering their stuff for those kinds of purposes. So yeah, that would be interesting. I'm going to write that one down and I'm going to come back to you if it happens, Michael.
Nice. Cool. So if I could recap what we've talked about today, Agile neuroscience and its vital role moving forward in the insight space, including that multiplying effect and the ability to find those insights that are hidden or obscured and when you combine it with traditional methodologies. We covered the role of academia in the commercial sphere, as we saw with the likes of Immersion. We've touched on the kinds of insights that have been uncovered using neuroscience, and I think we've brought it up on a couple of other podcasts, but the think, say, do. So being able to find out more about that and what's actually happening behind the surface underneath when we're actually making decisions or interacting with products, etc. And we've also looked into that crystal ball as well to see what the future may hold for the space. It's quite an exciting time to be in the industry, we'll say that. So.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's been so great. Like, I thank you again for letting me share some of my knowledge and experiences, because again, if you can't tell, I get excited about this stuff mainly because I see the value, and I know that the world's changing, and it's exciting to be able to change along with it. So
awesome. Well, keep up the awesome work.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Michael. I really appreciate it. It's been a fun combo.
Cool, thank you. I've enjoyed it too. A big thanks to everyone else who's joined us on the episode today. For the listeners out there, if you've liked what you've heard, please subscribe to the podcast or feel free to share it with others who might also find it helpful. So thanks for listening to Now That's Significant.